I see people I know.
And you've probably got a good following here, Lynda, so I'm not surprised. It's great. Good to see everyone. Welcome. We've got I see across North America, definitely on as I'm sort of skimming through folks. We are in meeting format for folks who are joining because we are going to be doing some breakout rooms for some interactivity a little later on. So we'll just give everyone a few more minutes to get going. As people welcome, if you can join in with on mute, great. There will be some time to join and discuss in small groups in a few minutes, but please feel free to join on mute. That would be great. Great. Well, for those who are joining and we haven't had a chance to meet, my name is David Singh. I am a partner here with the Customer Service Professionals Network, and we're really excited for this session because it's something we for those who don't know CSPN, we focus and support our community in 3 different ways, and you're all part of our community, which is our largest sort of umbrella of folks across North America. We also have our training arm, which is sort of really helping organizations design and develop corporate training, and where this area really does knowledge management connects 2 areas in our consulting business and our customer experience consulting. Is where does knowledge management sit? And it's always the question of, it's the unsexy, unsung hero of service delivery that people say, oh, it's sort of sometimes a hot potato, but when we get knowledge right, it makes everything start to work a little bit better. And so we're really excited to have Lynda King here today, Director of Knowledge from ServiceNow. Lynda has just got a great background of experience across global clients. She's worked with some small organizations like ServiceNow and Salesforce, some organizations some of you might know. And what we wanted to do today was really leverage Lynda's experience in the many organizations she's worked in and supported, and the lessons learned and some frameworks to take forward. And what we also want to be doing partway through, we'll be doing a breakout session and allowing people to have some small group conversations. So with all of that, the last bit of housekeeping would be, just as people join, if you wouldn't mind changing your name on your Zoom account so that we've got your name and the organization. It just helps as we start to calibrate, as we have some small conversations, that people know who they're speaking with from that perspective. So if you don't mind doing that, that would be great. Feel free to keep your cameras on or off as we go through the presentation, and I'll let you guys all manage your own Zoom views to be able to highlight Lynda as the core speaker as we get going. So with all of that, it's now over to Lynda. Lynda, welcome from the CSPN team, and we look forward to your presentation today.
Great, David, thank you. And for everyone that's taking time to participate today, I really, really appreciate it. We do want to make this interactive. I mean, we've got a good sized group, but David and team will be monitoring the chat. And so as we go through this, if you are like, hey, I'd like to talk more about that, feel free to make a note in the chat. David will, interrupt me so that we can make sure that this is a meaningful conversation and you're getting the answers that could be most helpful for you. So let me share. All right. So we good? Everybody sees my screen and.
Yep, it's looking good,
Right.
Lynda.
All right, perfect. So as David said, this is going to be a great session today, and some of you, it's fun. I actually recognize some names that have joined that I've walked this path with. So I've been here at ServiceNow for 3 years, leading a CAM program in the Global Tech Support Organization. And prior to coming here, as David mentioned, I worked at Salesforce for 7 years, and I did KM both for the support team, and I did KM in the employee success or HR space, built their portal. So you'll hear me reference support and cases and tickets, but I want to make sure that people realize that this is not just a support thing anymore, and we'll kind of talk about that history. And prior to Salesforce, then I led a global support organization for 15 years. So quite honestly, like I've grown up, doing this type of work. So I'm super happy to share just some of the what I've learned in the journey. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about why KM is so relevant today, and a little bit about the history. We're going to look at the KM maturity model that we picked up from TSIA. They're an industry that we have engaged with, support organizations have engaged with. And so then we're going to do the small group breakout. And what that breakout's going to be is basically in the maturity model, it's going to be a you are here type thing, where you're going to look at that model. You're going to, okay, the first stage is our knowledge is on Post-it notes, right? And so I bet everybody here is not in that stage. But as you look at that list, you can go, okay, gosh, I'm here, but I want to be here with my digital transformation. So our breakout's going to be helping us move out of denial as maybe where we are or aren't, and start to think about where do we want to take this, based on what you're doing today. Then we're going to come back and I'm going to spend some time walking through the KCS methodology. And it's an industry best practice that I've been using. It's grown up literally over the last 20 years. One of the keys always is, how do we measure this, and what are the business outcomes that are important to think about related to knowledge management? And saving the best for last is just some of the lessons learned. And then we'll have some time, for QA. So let's get started. So I wanted to, do a little bit of a history lesson. So when did KM become a thing, right? And if we look at, history, so 19 years ago, Wikipedia started. And the model of Wikipedia was, it was a collective ownership, and it was just-in-time editing. So these were like really bold concepts that came out. And again, we're talking now 19 years. So if we look at the story with Wikipedia and where they started, right? So they are now 6 million articles, and with localization, up to 55 million articles that are being managed and maintained by the community, quite honestly. So this is like a whole different concept, and this was 19 years ago. So now we want to talk about Google. So searching with Google became a verb, and I'm going to date myself, but it was my 5-year-old who's now 28, who we were talking about something, and he's like, why don't you just Google it, Mom? And I'm just like, okay, I'm not sure, like, what are we talking about? So if we think about September 1998 is when Google, became a thing. And Google is an unstructured collection of content that is owned by millions, right? And the consumer doesn't have to know anything about the sources. As we think about validity and reputation of the content today, right, it's up to the user to decide. You're going to get 10 different answers to the question you're asking, and you decide based on who the source is, whether you're going to believe it or not. So I want us to think about knowledge management in some new ways, because some of us grew up like literally, I spent my first $1 million on a system in 1995. Okay, Google wasn't even a thing when I bought my first system. Now, when we get into the lessons learned, the technology could not support the dream that we had at that time, right? So we have to remember, some of us that have seen this in iterations knows that, is it really going to work, right? Should I really invest all this effort? Is it going to be able to deliver the dream that we've talked about. So then I want to talk about, like, even before Google, KCS had already emerged as a best practice, right? So in 1992, even 6 years before Google, the support industry was facing, major crisis, honestly, in the fact that there were mergers happening, acquisitions happening. We were faced with doing more with less. I mean, there was no budget in support, and we had to figure out a better way. And so the KCS principles within the industry actually grew out of a very serious, business crisis that support organizations were facing. And so when we go through the detail here, it looks like a lot of theory, and and it looks kind of formal. And I want to make sure that those that have not been exposed to the KCS methodology realize that it grew up like on the ground, in the field, being tried and tested in the organizations because we had to. In 2016, we basically rebranded from knowledge-centered support, because it kind of was focused on support, to realize that the organization, many other parts of the organization, would benefit from knowledge management. And so we changed, not we, but I've been, with the group, since the beginning, changed it to knowledge-centered service, meaning that it could live in the HR space. So when I was at Salesforce, now we're talking 8 years ago, we were talking about KCS in HR, and we built the portal, we built, all the user interfaces using the KCS interface. So when you're thinking about, and those of you that are here, I kind of looked at who had registered, and several people are in support, lots of different parts of the business. Just realize that if your business is moving really fast, and if your internal teams are doing work and learning things that aren't being captured, when we're going through this, think about, oh, I thought it could only be in support, or I only thought it was in a ticketing system with IT or with HR. Be aware that there's a lot of companies now that are actually doing knowledge-centered service end to end, meaning that it is a corporate initiative. So when we get into the "you are here," you'll be asking yourself, okay, where am I with my own team, but where is our company? And again, there's a very active membership today. We continue to feed back to the consortium because it's a nonprofit. And the good part is, when we get into some of the assets, I'm going to give you links here, and we'll give you these slides, so you'll have the links. But the practices guide, the adoption guide, these are all public documents. So you don't have to pay consultants or do anything. I mean, you can have access to really the playbook on how to do this within your organization. So, just to kind of get everybody nodding here, the challenges in knowledge management that I've experienced, right? The first thing is we're seeing the same questions and issues being resolved multiple times, right? And that doesn't matter whether you're in IT or in HR or doing customer support. It's a case where there's a trend, and we talk about the fact that often 20% of your knowledge is actually going to address 80% of your volume, if you're doing it right. We also know, and like I said, technology often didn't work, right? So, I've been working with all of these technology platforms over time. The good news now is that technology can satisfy the dream. The more important challenges are the people in the process, and we'll talk about why that is. But the technology is not the problem anymore, which again is fabulous. So we also know that everybody is storing content in different places, which is giving an inconsistent experience for the users. They don't know where to go. There's not a Google from your corporation, search bar that you just Google it, and magically, it doesn't matter what the department is, content just appears exactly what you were looking for. And then the last one, which is so common, is there's never enough time to dedicate to the knowledge creation and the knowledge curation in any process, right? And so what we'll talk about with the KCS model is the fact in support, later never comes. So if we're going to say we're going to do knowledge later, we're going to do it on Fridays. We're going to do it at the end of the month. We're going to do it sometime later. Later never happens. And so we had to rethink how we approached, the knowledge management strategy. So again, think about your own organization. If you're a global organization, or not, think about all the different places that the knowledge is stored, within your organization, both internal and which content can actually be shared externally, and how does the user decide what information is internal and what information is external. You need to actually have a formal approach to that. So, SharePoint, OneNote, on their local desktop, Slack channels, emails, but we know today most of it is being stored in people's heads, right? And which means it can't be shared in its current format. So it's really important to, as your teams are capturing and they're learning things in their day job, is to capture what they're learning in findable, reusable ways. So at the fundamental, that's what KCS is all about, is consider a trigger, which is somebody asks a question. Now they may ask it to their peer in email, or they may get up and walk over and ask them, or they may ask it in Slack. But that's a trigger event that said they asked a question because they didn't know the answer and they didn't know where to find the answer. And so, like I said, although we are focused often in IT and HR and support that the trigger is a case or an incident, but we can take it one step further and say, but it really starts with a question. So people, process, and technology, right? So better knowledge sharing and self-help. We know now that Google has trained us globally that if we have a question about anything, we're going to start with Google. And ideally, in a corporation, we would love to have a Google, just for our corporation, where we could find everything we needed to know about our company or our company's process or technical information. We know speeding up the new hire learning curve is a critical element for all of our enterprises, right? We're hiring a lot of people, getting them ready to do their job saves the company money. And it helps the new hire be satisfied with what they're doing. And we think about this current generation, and this is a generation thing. And that's why I wanted to do this history lesson, because the workforce that's coming in our front door grew up on Google. They grew up on their mobile phones. They actually expect that consumer-like experience when they join our companies. So we want to make sure that we speed up that new hire and we engage with that new hire in the way that they're used to consuming information. For those of us that, our business is run on cases or incidents, we obviously want to improve the efficiencies with case resolution. And then this content curation thing. So, and if we were in a room, I would say, okay, everybody raise their hand, but think about the time in which the internet at your site, which was supposed to be kind of the Google, of your corporation. Think about the time when you searched that. Number one, may have found a document, looked at the last update date, which you knew that could not be the current information, right? It was 5 years old, or you knew that it had old branding, or there was something that told you that content wasn't current. So the other piece about knowledge management, it is not just to create it. It's making sure that whatever you're creating, you have a curation strategy. And again, this is what we learned within the KCS methodology is, okay, how do you build that in the workflow? So now we're going to talk a little about this maturity model. Then we're going to take time for a few questions, and then we're going to jump into the breakout. So again, this is an eye chart. But I want to highlight some things. So we have basically 4 phases, recognition phase, instantiation phase, value realization phase, and then strategic phase. And then we have, corporate culture and people and process and technology. So I'm just going to highlight. So in column 1, if your knowledge base is built on Post-it notes, meaning you walk up to somebody's, workstation and they have, Post-it notes everywhere. I mean, you're here because they feel like the best place to store their information is on Post-it notes in their workspace environment. Now, the other thing that you want to think about is, do you have a unified search strategy? So do you have a way in which the corporation is doing unified search and allowing you to find information from multiple repositories? Could be a SharePoint site, could be an intranet site, could be your product documentation, could be your learning management system. So the idea is, if you don't have a unified search strategy, then, you have to say, I'm actually still, I call it this a little bit in the denial phase because you're not really doing knowledge management in this first column. So if you look at instantiation, so basically there are processes and established procedures for capturing knowledge, publishing knowledge, and maintaining knowledge. So in a lot of our environments, we're capturing some knowledge, policies, procedures, product documentation, we're publishing some things, but again, you have to ask the question about what is our curation strategy and do we have one? Is it effective? And so but we can also see that again in instantiation, now we're saying we need a unified search strategy because now we have content, organized content, and now we need to be able to find it. So if we go to the next value realization, this is when the program expands beyond support. And I'll give you an example. So one of the projects we're working on is, we have technical support. We've been doing KCS, things are going well. We have other teams outside of support that are saying, I want some of that actually. And that's the best way because they're saying, we have generic email boxes where we take a bunch of questions in. And we know, any of us that have been in the industry, that's one step above Post-it notes, but we can't be effective in understanding our volumes, understanding our SLAs, getting back to if we're using an email box to handle our situation. Plus, that means that customers don't, or internal users don't have a way, to help themselves. So in the value realization, you're starting to think about, how does this knowledge experience impact your employee, right? Productivity measures, first call resolution, cost per incident, employee sat. And same with customer, are you assessing your customer's experience in their ability to help themselves? And then when they need your support, are you managing that, effectively? So then in the strategic phase, again, it takes one step further. Now your customers are actually involved in your knowledge creation. And one example of that could be, and today, in our world, we've got a community where customers can actually submit content, based on information, to be reviewed from a knowledge-based perspective. So the idea is, are you extending this out to, either your end internal users or out to your customers to at least give you feedback, right? And so the feedback loop is, this is helpful, this is not helpful. So what I want to do right now is just take a little break and let anybody ask some questions, and then we're going to go, into the breakout rooms. So I don't know if we've seen any questions in the chat, or if anybody has, something they can either unmute or, put it in the chat. All right. So I think I'm glad that at least, everyone's tracking. So now we're actually going to move to, our breakout rooms.
Perfect. So if maybe I can jump in here, Lynda, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So this is gonna be the magic of the internet. We hope everyone joins us on this next step, and then we see you on the other side. What we're gonna be doing in just a few minutes, if you do look at the your chat window, we are just putting in a copy of that maturity matrix into the chat, so you can download it. There's one already in there, but just in case, Bonnie's going to upload another one right now, and so we ask you to download that from the chat. And what we're going to do is we're going to break the groups into small groups of 5 or 6, and we'll encourage you guys to have some small group conversations amongst yourselves to get to know sort of what's happening in each of your organizations and to share from that perspective. So we're going to start to split up and then we're going to be back in about 15 minutes. Lynda might jump into a few of those conversations just to listen in, and we'll look forward to seeing people in about 15 minutes. So Bonnie, if you can go ahead and break us into the groups, then we'll see you guys in the small groups. Getting to know some of the folks in our room and hear some of the challenges, and it just makes it real. Like I think we're all in our challenges, and we're all in different parts of the knowledge twister game, as I was referring to it over in the and being able to see where we all sit. So back over to Lynda to continue on.
Great. Let me share my screen again. So we'll get back to where we left off. All right, so we were
around slide 12, I think.
Yep. All right, so now we're going to talk about knowledge-centered services. So you've seen this diagram, in the deck, and you're like, that's kind of a crazy diagram, Lynda. What are these circles about and things? So what I want to do before I talk about the principles, I want to explain the diagram because it is material. So you can see in the center of the diagram, we have customer experience, knowledge reuse, and product improvement. And so what we're saying here is if we do, all the things on the outside of this spiral, or what we call a double loop process, we're going to improve customer experience. Our product's going to get better by reusing the knowledge. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. So on the solve side, on the right-hand side, you'll see 4 discrete steps: capture, structure, reuse, and improve. So what that means is while somebody's solving or answering a question or solving an issue, they're going to be capturing what they're learning, both from what are the symptoms? What does it look like from an end user perspective, or what does it look like from a customer perspective? So for example, the report won't run. Okay, so that's what the customers experience. Now, when you get to the back end of what's happening, what's causing that report to not run may not be the reporting subsystem at all, right? It could be something related to their internet connection, could be something related to system resources, could be that they don't have access to run this report, but it's just not telling them that. And so you want to be able to capture not only what the end users experience, which what we call is user context, but you want to structure this information in a way where you have both the short description, so we know what the customers experience, then we have a description, steps to reproduce, and then what the resolution is. And the resolution could be nothing related to what the customer said it was. So the idea from structure is to make sure you're capturing both. And in the structure element, we're saying it has to be easy to read, easy to consume, And there's two audiences. One, the humans. So what you'll see is we don't want fancy paragraphs. We don't want the encyclopedia. We don't want you to write everything you've ever known, because people aren't going to read it. And in our breakout session, we were talking about this very specifically. So those of us that have been around for a while, where there were intranets and there were policy documents on the intranet, I mean, they were posted, but you didn't read them. Like, you really, maybe in your day one or day two onboarding, but after that, you did not read them. You asked somebody, what's the Cliffs Notes version of this? Or you went to HR to get, or IT to find out what the story was. So the idea here is you still have to have those written policies for compliance and regulation. But what you're going to put in your knowledge article is the Cliffs Notes version, the 3 to 5 most important points. That's what's going to be in your knowledge article. And not only does a human brain do better when you structure it that way, the search engine does way better not to have to trip over all of those extra words in those policy documents that aren't necessarily material to the situation. So structure becomes really important, both for the human and for the technology for search. And then we have reuse. And I want to speak to this because just because you viewed an article doesn't mean you got value out of it. And so how do you distinguish between, like, it was value or they just viewed it and it wasn't relevant? And the way you do that is making sure that if you're an internal team and this issue, this article solves this issue that you're working on with your end user or with your customer, you attach that article to that case or incident. And that way you're starting to establish that reputation of that article that said that actually was reused and helped solve an issue. From a customer perspective, you also want to make sure, whether it's your end user or your external customer, you want them to be able to tell you specifically, was this helpful, yes or no, or did this solve my issue, in an explicit way, so that you know you can count views all day long, but you don't know if it actually solved it. So you want to make sure that you have a way to indicate that it did help the customer. And so reuse becomes important. And then improve is the last point in our solve loop, is the fact that we call it, just in time editing. And what that means is if you see something that's not accurate, you are obligated to either flag it or fix it. And what that means is, in the point of using it is when you're going to notice that it's not current. So if your customer, can tell you this wasn't helpful and tell you why, that's perfect. In the moment when they were using it, they can say it was incomplete, it wasn't accurate, or some other issue related to it. And so that's the solve loop. And so if we go to the evolve loop, this is more about culture and technology, but the fact that you want to have a methodology that helps you with content health. So one of the things that we've established in our environment is we have a KB score. So an article has a score, and that score is based on how many times an internal team got value out of it and how many times the customer got value out of it. So that when we're doing our quarterly review on content, we can actually establish which content's being used and which content isn't. Process integration becomes important. And think about the tools you're using. Is, let's say I have a ticketing system, either incidents or cases. You want to make sure knowledge pops up right when they're opening up that ticket, so you can see, do we already have an answer for this? And if we do, is it easy for the agent or engineer to just attach it, to click a button? And if we don't have an article and we filled out our case properly or incident properly, what if we could just have a button that we could click that moves the description over, it moves the title over, it moves the proposed solution, it moves the steps to reproduce. So now we have a draft article without any extra effort from your agent or your tech support engineer. And so that's what we talk about as process integration, is the fact that let's integrate this case solving process with article creation. So we're doing it just in time. We're not saving creating that article for later, because we know in support, later never comes, right? And so this is the point about why this was so critical, back in the day. And then performance assessments. Again, if you're doing, productivity and how many cases did they resolve, what was their CSAT, you also want to say, how did they engage with the knowledge? How many articles did they create? How many times did they reuse articles? How many times did they modify or update in that flag it and fix it? And then the last point of the evolve is to make sure that your leadership team is, in every initiative that they're talking about, they have to talk about knowledge. And so it's important, to make sure that knowledge is in every conversation. So now we're just going to run through the key principles. So as I mentioned, create content as a byproduct of solving cases. Now this is a whole different way to work. So this isn't just a knowledge management initiative. This is redoing the way in which they do problem solving. The second thing is we're going to evolve content based on demand. So what I mentioned is we're going to be in the middle of using that knowledge, and we're going to see that it's not accurate or complete. We're obligated to flag it or fix it right there. We want to make sure that we're developing this knowledge base based on the collective experience, both from an end user perspective or customer perspective and internal. So why that's important is some teams have a knowledge base that's dedicated. This is my customer knowledge base. Then they have, let's say it's an IT team. Okay, here's my knowledge base for end users. And then I have a knowledge base for my tier 1. And then I have a knowledge base for my tier 2. And then I have a knowledge base that only my tier 3 can see. Well, what makes it really difficult is when you have a process change, you've got to go to every one of those points and update those articles. What you want to consider is in your article templates is to be able to have this field is only for your customers to see. This field in this article is for your tier 1. This field in your article is for tier 2. And this little private field, only tier 3 can see it, because we really don't want everybody to know or dig into that. So again, be thinking about how you build your knowledge, thinking about all the different audiences that might interact with that content. And then the last thing is just this idea of we're fostering learning and collaboration and sharing at every point, right? So if you have a P1, the executives should be saying, I'm glad you solved it, but did you get your knowledge article done? Or send me the knowledge article that you wrote based on the situation. That's how I'm going to close the loop on it. And if leadership is asking about knowledge all the time, and when we rolled out a new process, they said, let me see the knowledge article that we're using here. So we'll send an email, but then the meat of the content is actually in the knowledge article. And you'll start to see the culture change, because everything we do has a knowledge article. So one question that comes up often is, okay, how do we think about content, right? And so I just wanted us to look at this continuum to see that, we have, conversations, on the phone, we have social network, a tweet or a request on Facebook. Then we have email interactions, right? And then we have knowledge articles kind of right in the middle. And why I'm just highlighting this is these knowledge articles sometimes can be only needed in the middle of transition. So you've got a new product rolling out or a new process rolling out that you don't have time to do full documentation on. But the idea is a shelf life of knowledge articles could be the case where you don't want to always have to keep them alive. Your most used knowledge articles then could be shifted off to these other teams to actually formalize them in your product documentation. And then the other idea is to realize that we want to improve, our products and services based on our feedback. So when we're seeing in external facing environment, we're seeing a lot of questions on how to configure this. Well, so there's two questions here. Is our documentation not clear enough that helps the customer step by step? Or is our documentation fine, but it's too many steps, right? So there's two pieces there. One, it might just be, let's update the documentation, or it might be going back to the product team that says, this is too hard to install. And so you want to make sure that, you know, knowledge is not just kind of sitting on the front end with self-help with customers. You want to make sure that you're taking what you're learning and sharing that with your product teams. And, you know, here at ServiceNow, we have a quarterly product experience review where we have product management and our, you know, VPs of development at the table, and we're giving them a report card of how did your last release go? What kind of issues did we see? And we want to make sure, you know, that you're imprinting and improving your product based on what's happening in the field, so that your end goal is to remove any of those issues, those hard to configure or not well documented. You want to remove those from your support organization. And again, this goes back to the end of the day, you know, support, you know, isn't designed to scale at the velocity that your number of customers are being added or the number of products that you're being asked to support. So that crunch becomes critical for support to be able to, you know, shift work to people they don't pay. So that's, I mean, we talk about self-service, but I mean, that's what we're doing, is shifting that work, you know, to our end users to research it on their own. And then we also want to shift work, you know, back to the product teams that are creating it, or the, you know, the process team, whatever that is, that's creating your environment, to make sure that they're making that easy to use, easy to consume. So I just wanted to speak again on resources. So in this deck, which we're going to send to you at the end of this call, you'll see I have a link at the bottom here, and it's called, you know, it's the kcsacademy.net, and then it's KCS-resources. And there's 3 documents: the core concepts document, the adoption guide, which is 86 pages, right? So it is a very detailed, and then there's also the practices guide. And so it's, you know, all of this is very well documented. And so what I wanted to just talk about, you know, quickly, is some of the key elements that it doesn't matter if you're doing KCS or not, all of these things are actually required in any knowledge management initiative. So the first one is, built into your program needs to be transformation and continuous improvement. Don't wait until you've got the perfect tool and all the teams aligned and you're going to do this big bang approach. What you have to do is take a project that's happening that nobody knows about, and you need to just, you know, disperse all this information out. That's a perfect chance to say, okay, let's start our knowledge management initiative around this new program. You want to have buy-in at all levels, because you're going to have a hard time maintaining it if you don't. Strong leadership is required, right? So the role that I'm in at ServiceNow, I mean, that's what I do, is knowledge management. You want to be looking at the collective experience, like I said, both the internal team, how they're experiencing your knowledge base, and if you're next, you know, offering support either to your end users or your customers, you want to be looking at how are they experiencing your knowledge. Is it easy to find? Is it easy to consume? Collective ownership, as I mentioned, you don't have a knowledge team and they're the only ones that keep updating. Because what we've learned over the years is that knowledge team, you know, actually gets cannibalized, honestly, because people are like, well, like, we've really got this important thing, and so we'll do this knowledge thing later. So even if you have a dedicated team, they're not going to be dedicated too long, because they're going to be swept up in new programs. So that's why if you say, okay, everybody owns this knowledge, either you have the rights to actually fix things, or at a minimum, you have the responsibility to flag things, and then have, you know, a team and a process that supports following up on that. So thinking about that, if somebody clicks that this wasn't helpful, is it creating a task for someone to go do something about that? Number 6 is important, just as a problem solving methodology, Kepner-Trigo, you need to seek to understand before seeking to solve. And really thinking about that as you're trying to listen first before you're immediately jumping to, I think I got the answer, because you'll miss important details. And then point 7 is important. When we say sufficient to solve, this means that we're not going to wait to publish this until we've documented every possible scenario. We're saying for this particular question or this particular issue, this solved this customer's situation. And we're going to publish that, even potentially externally, with those caveats that this was sufficient to solve. And when we learn more, that there's 3 other scenarios that this could happen in, we'll update the article at that time. I mentioned knowledge integration, just making sure that you have knowledge integrated, literally physically within the system. So you can attach easily, you can create, you can retire. And then point number 9 is important, is coaching. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what we mean by coaching. And then 10 is assess a value. So those are 2 elements that I want to dig into with our next slides. So I'll just, before we jump into that, when we say technology supports the process, what do we mean by that? So this is an example where you have a portal, could be an internal portal or a customer portal, but we're going to want the end user to search. Hopefully they'll self-serve. If they don't find what they're looking for, we're going to create a ticket. We're going to create an article. We're going to share that knowledge. And so this is what we're saying, is that it's done within the workflow of solving the issue. So now we want to talk about implementation considerations. So and again, this is just based on my experience of what work streams that you could consider in your environment. So these are the work streams that we use. So in our breakout session, we were talking about like data migration from one system, maybe SharePoint, to another system, ServiceNow. Having someone establish a team that establishes your content standards. How are we going to handle the content and organize the content? There's a feature process in KCS called AQI, Article Quality Index, where you're scoring articles. Then you want to have a technology work stream, typically led by IT, that handles like approval workflows, article templates, your integration with your case or incident system. You want to have an implementation training work stream. So who is going to be responsible for training, the team, your change management strategy? Metrics are always really tricky. And so you want to have a metrics work stream that's paying attention to both the adoption and the outcome, and how are you going to measure the impact of the program? You want to have a communications work stream, and again, these aren't like 20 people. These work streams could be like 2 or 3, and people could be on different work streams. So in our case, we had one person that was on the content work stream, and they wanted to be on the communication work stream. So I'm not talking about a lot of people here, but these are the functions that you want to think about. And your communication work stream is focused on, making sure that the audience knows everything that's happening from a change management, but you also want to be thinking about your rewards and recognition for your program. And then the last work stream that's really important is, what's your search strategy? And synonyms and stop words and pinning, and what are your metrics around search as far as your click through, and your average click rank? And so think about that, and kind of take a mental note of like, what kind of team do I have here? Do I just have a knowledge team and they're trying to do it all, right? And what we learned is that until you really take this seriously and realize that every new hire that starts needs to know about your knowledge program. And so it needs to be in every onboarding initiative, every onboarding for new hires, needs to be, this is where you search in the portal. This is how you self-help. That helps IT and it helps HR. So I'll just talk about, the adoption timeline that we worked on, so you get a sense of a way in order to kind of chunk this out so you don't have a big bang. So what we did, of course, you're going to have, agents or engineer training and manager training is going, all the time. And then you're going to have your new hire core training that's going all the time. So KCS or your knowledge program is integrated in those existing courses that you have. But what we did is we started with 6%. So in our case, it was 29 people were in our first wave. And basically, this is the team that defined the workflow, the approval process, the content standard, the metrics. And we proved everything out in the first wave. And the people that we picked for this first wave were our early adopters, people who couldn't help themselves but to do knowledge. And there was just a handful when I joined. It was a small number of people that were actually doing knowledge. Then what we did is, after wave one was done, we did a retrospect and we said, okay, how did that go? What do we need to do in our training program? Because key elements were missed. So then we did wave two, after we did our retrospective and updated our process and our training, and we doubled the team. And we picked certain SME areas that were eager, like we wanted to have early success. So if you have teams or even individuals on teams that are like, I'm never going to do that, you can't make me, don't have them in your early waves. And then our third wave, again, now we did another third of our organization and did the same thing, retrospect based on how did wave two go. And then our last wave, was the rest of the team. Now we're talking 250 people, in our last wave. So like a really large initiative. And then I add, 2020 is really measuring our behavior adoption. And then I put future on here because you're never done. Like, this is not a program that starts and ends. Once you start it, for the rest of your life, you will be doing care and feeding with your knowledge program. So I wanted to speak on this coaching and measurement progress, because I think this is a key element that's missing from many initiatives. So how the KCS model suggests is the fact that you need to have a coach, and people are like, well, what is a coach? I don't understand. What we learned, and this is again 20 years of experience, is the fact that in our tech support environments and in our HR environments, that to have an outside person train you on a process, like a trainer who doesn't do problem solving for their day job, our tech support team, they're like, they don't even know. Like, I don't even trust them. And so we had our trainers actually be tech support engineers, their peers. And then these coaches, again, are part of their team. And these coaches, because they already have a reputation, basically after training happens, so we did a 1 hour training, so very short in-person training, where we train them how to use the tool, what our content standard is, get them all jazzed up. And then we say, okay, your homework assignment out of training is everybody creates one article. And we do a follow-up session, another hour session, where everybody brings their articles to the table, and each person puts their article up on the, Zoom, because now we're doing it remotely, and everybody critiques them on their article. And we want the teams to get used to getting feedback about their article, and they learn, okay, what does that content standard mean when it says easy to consume? So anyway, so we do this training, and then we assign them a coach, and this is a peer coach, and it's recommended like 1 to 5. So, not too many people, but that coach actually reviews all the articles in the first 30 days. If there's any issues or concerns, they, communicate those, back to the manager if they're just not playing. Like, you've been trained and 30 days, you didn't create one article. Okay, that's not the coach's problem. That's actually the manager problem, because it's not a skill issue, it's a will issue. And since this is a peer situation, you don't want to, jeopardize that peer relationship. And so that coach is really that positive person that's there to help. Then we had the next 30 days we called pre-contributor, which means the coach is just spot checking articles. They did good work in the first 30 days. We know they know how to create articles. Now the coach is just looking at them, and they may, give them some feedback, but they're not going to have to look at every article. And then, as part of our methodology, then at 60 days-ish, then they move to contributor role, and they don't have to have anybody else review it. Now, this is a very aggressive approval process, but one of the things that we learned is if you put too many steps in between creation and people getting value, you will have so many articles in pending review that nobody gets benefit from. And so it's so interesting how if you, simplify your process. So this was hugely valuable for us. So the coach responsibilities are, obviously I mentioned, we had max 5 tech support engineers per coach. We wanted them to just reinforce what they've been trained on to develop that skill and confidence, because people don't just create a bad article. Like they're like, I'm just going to create this really bad article. No, it's because they have too much context in their head that they just forgot to write down. And a second pair of eyes helps them realize, oh, I should put this in the title. That really helps somebody if they're looking at it. Again, providing feedback. So we want, the coachee to get used to getting feedback on their work, which is a little bit awkward. The first time that they have to put their article up for everybody to see is a little bit awkward. And then we want them to schedule, some one-on-ones to keep the conversation going. And what we found in the sustain is the fact that these coaches really are overall change agents, and every other initiative that we were rolling out to these teams, we always engaged with the coaches first. And we said, what do you think about this design? What do you think about this process? Give us feedback. So before we took it to the tech support engineers, we had received really good input. So before I go into the measuring progress, and I think we're doing pretty good on time. So I wanted to see, that was a lot. So I just wanted to see, what questions that we might have.
Hey, Lynda, there was one question that that came up in the group, and you mentioned you talked a little bit about that case example with that you just walked through from that rollout. But where do you, from the ServiceNow, going back to the maturity matrix, where do you think ServiceNow sits on that in that model? If you can answer that. Yeah,
absolutely. So because we're starting to, in that far right strategy, we have, dedicated resources. Obviously, we have me and my team. And because now other teams, like our legal departments, our compliance departments, are now coming to us to say, I want some of that. So I would say that we are, just moving into, the strategy, because now this is becoming, an enterprise-wide initiative, not just this is something we only do in support.
Perfect. And then there's another question, if I can jump in there, it was around the skeleton guide, and I think you went through a lot of that in explaining some of the frameworks and from that perspective. But are there other are there other documents that would provide a skeleton guide to actually building a knowledge base?
Yeah. So you'll find that there's sections in this guide that gives you insights on things to consider, because typically you're always converting, right? You always have something in SharePoint, or you have something, in Confluence, or you have something that you've started with. And the question is, how do we migrate that content from we have this many artifacts. So things to consider, in my experience, is one, do not convert everything. I mean, absolutely, even though you could and technology is in place, just don't. What I did is I said, I'm going to go based on usage. And we had usage metrics on how many views articles had. So I said, if it had X number of views, so in my case, it was if it had 50 views and if it had been updated in the last year. That's what I migrated. And then what I did, because people grumbled about that. Well, what about this? I really want, then I said, okay, everybody gets to bring 10 articles with. And what I use those 10 articles is, what I'm bringing over, and you have some stuff that isn't maybe meeting my criteria, but you still want to keep it. Great. In my training was, I'll train you how to do it. And now we're going to have time for you to migrate your 10 articles. And what that did is then they knew their favorite articles were migrated because they did it themselves. They used the tools and technology to build it. So then there wasn't this, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? And so it integrates, training, migrating their favorite content and getting them to build, confidence in the system. So as far as references, I'll take that as an action to see if there's some other industry documents that can help, a little bit on, kind of building a knowledge base. What other questions, David? Anything?
There was one last, if you got time for one more?
Yeah, I think so.
Perfect. So it was from Vicky, and it was really around when starting to create the knowledge article, there are topics and categories, that sort of highest level sort of architecture of the knowledge base, and how do you think about structuring from that perspective?
Yeah, so actually taxonomy, just saying the word makes me hyperventilate. And I'm just gonna be honest about that. And the reason why that is the fact that my experience, and again, this goes back, we're talking like 1995. So like many, many, many times that I've done this, is you always over-engineer it because you can. The tools allow you to over-engineer it. And you are stuck with it. For your lifetime until you get a new tool, because the thought of recategorizing all your content. So I'll give you an example. So when I came to ServiceNow, the taxonomy for the knowledge bases that I, inherited, had already been established, and they were a little bit messy, again, just full transparency, right? And at the time, it's like going back and recategorizing every knowledge article. Like, I've got other more important things, right? And so literally 3 years later, I have an active project that I'm finally, and now I have 22,000 articles. But I'll say, and when we get to the lessons learned, hire a data scientist, like right now, put it on your list, because you just have no idea the value that a data scientist can be in your environment. So for instance, I have a data scientist that's now basically recasting our taxonomy automatically using data science. Now we're going to have a human review it, but I just couldn't have dedicated a human to do that. Now the fact that he's using technology to do it, is super important. So I would just say that don't ever over-engineer, for sure. And what we're doing here at ServiceNow, which is a big step, is the fact that we now are establishing a master taxonomy for our entire company. So every service that we offer, every product that we offer is all going to be, defined in this master taxonomy. So that now for, CPQ, so we're doing licensing, like everything can be attached. So we have a product, and then we can attach cases to that product, and we can attach changes to that product, and we can attach knowledge to that product. And so that's the step that we're taking, is now we're all going to use the same basic taxonomy, end to end.
I like that. I think it's that sort of, when we were talking leading up to the session about the crawl, walk, run, and that sort of idea of the crawl is don't over-engineer and sort of start and keep going. And I think on that run part of, and it could be in that sort of walk to run, is leveraging sort of data scientists, whether they're fractional people you bring in a while to do a point in time search and review, but letting the data sort of help guide you as much as that as well. So I think really great feedback. So thanks for letting us have a quick question break. Appreciate some engagement. Thanks for those. If people want to keep asking questions, we've got some time towards the end.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're going to talk about the measurement. And again, there was a time in my career that I would have hyperventilated about measurement, because measuring the impact of knowledge, that's kind of like, that's really your job security. And if you can't do it and you want investment, it's like, okay, how do you get anybody to invest? So I'm just going to walk through some of the things to consider. So I start with this slide because this is the money slide. So I'm glad for those of you that are still here listening, paying attention, this is the story, that really convinced both the internal teams that are working on cases in our world and our leadership team that says, wow, like this is huge. So you can see, and again, these are, real numbers. So in Q3 of 2019, we solved, just shy of 52,000 cases in a quarter. In Q3 of 2020, we solved 58,000, right? So in this case, we had 11% case growth. Now we had been growing at 18% case growth. So already we were seeing, this, flattening the curve, was important. But most important is how efficient was our team in solving this. So time to relief, and I'll just explain how ServiceNow measures this. So the case is opened, we work on it. There's a point in time that we move the case to a case status of solution proposed. And what we mean there is we have come up with a strategy, could be a workaround, could be information that we think that we have given the customer a solution. Now it can take, days, weeks, potentially for the customer to actually execute on that proposed solution, depending on what we're asking them to do. So we count the time from when the case was open to time for a solution proposed. That's what we call time to relief. And then we also measure time to resolution, but that's another clock that's ticking. So what's important is to take a look at this. So this is, again, in our current state in Q3 of 2020, with a case that doesn't have an article attached, we're at a mean time, which median time. So we're taking long tail and short tail off. This is like, median is really hard to move, but you can see 3.5 days is our median. With an article attached, it's at 1.94 days. So 44% reduction in getting the customer to a solution proposed, because they're leveraging the knowledge that we've been creating, over this program. And so this, and we know that if we solve customer issues faster, our CSAT is going up, our employee SAT is going up, because their job is easier, right? It's giving them time back in their day to work on more complex issues. They're not solving the same issues over and over again. So this is, this is the, I guess, high level approach that we're using today to measure the business impact of the program. And so just a little bit more on this, so we had 3 different buckets. One was global adoption. So how many tech support engineers were searching from the case or incident? Because when I started, the way our system worked is nobody searched. So I needed to get them to be willing to search. Then I needed to see how many tech support engineers were attaching on a regular basis. And I'm super excited to say, we're now, the last 3 quarters, we had over 600 consistently doing attaching every month. So we know this behavior now is part of our routine. We also looked at how many different tech support engineers were creating content. And again, this is one where, this goes up and down, right? And so we were down in, August, and then we were up in September, and we're down again in October. And we know the COVID thing is impacting all of our process efficiencies, but we need to keep an eye on that if we lose our momentum in creating content, the program will kind of die a slow death, honestly. And then we look at how many articles are created. We don't set goals on, okay, everybody has to create 5 articles. We let the content creation be driven based on the case. So either you have a case where you have an article to attach, or you don't. And if you don't have an article attached, and we think that this is not a very, very unique customer situation, we want you to create an article. And then regionally, we, kept kind of competition that what were the attach rates by SME team, by geo. We kept track of how many articles were created, and we just told them whether they were up or down. It wasn't how many, but it was like, they're either more than last month, which is green, or they're less than last month, which is red. And then we also measured, okay, we trained your team, how many people moved from candidate to contributor. And then on the, the far right is our program performance out. And so we talked about our time to relief, cases deflected, and our reuse. So this is an example of self-service success. So this is one of our dashboards. And why I'm showing this, because I just think it's interesting that we are showing in the light blue, these are the people that are actually logging into our portal. The people in green are the people that are looking at our content, usually starting at Google. So when we say that we need to invest in our portal, and we do, but we have to realize that actually the customer is coming to our knowledge article really as the landing page to the portal, because that's really all they're ever seeing. So the idea is, and we're in the process of reimagining our, our landing page, or so that they can see this knowledge article, but that allows them to navigate our portal from that knowledge article, because we're seeing, as you can tell with the trends, most of our content is being viewed through Google. Just that's kind of why I started with Google in the very beginning, is you need to be paying attention to search engine optimization, because you want to make sure that your content, can be, invested in paid, so that some of your content, gets to the top there. But it's super important. They're not going to come to your website first. They're always going to go to Google first. So we had an 18%, quarter over quarter increase of views, which is super important. And I'm not going to go into these dashboards in excruciating detail, because I want to save time for questions. Plus, this time in a 2-hour workshop, you're like, okay, I can't consume any more. But I also wanted them to be in the handouts, so that these are things that you could pay attention to and consider for your own environment. So this is what we use for what we call our content evolution. And I mentioned that we establish a score of every article, and then we evaluate which content is being used and which content isn't. So in this case, our third quarter, we had, 2,600 articles that we wanted the team to review. And then we could show them, down here, how they were doing on their progress, which again, in one quarter, we gave them the assignment to look at 2,600 articles. They went through 827 manually, and they updated 1,100 articles. And then we carried over, the 697 to the next round. But this was a huge first step in getting the teams to own their content. Now we're going to do another round of this manually this quarter. And then in January, we're actually going to use the KB score, and we're going to auto retire, which again, that's another thing I hyperventilate on. But we've got that methodology with our data scientists where the team is confident that we're flagging articles that aren't adding value in the system. And if we would decide we needed to reincarnate an article in our system, it's easy. So that's not big drama. But you can see up here, when you look at this in more details, we can go by article owner group, we can go by category, location, manager. So this is a Tableau dashboard that we use, and it allowed the teams to just understand their content in a way that they'd never seen it before. So the next thing that we want to just again give you a sense, is our attach health. And so for those of you that are considering, moving towards like a KCS methodology where you're doing that reuse, and you're deciding the KB, reputation or that KB score based on how it's being reused, you can't afford for anybody to game the system, right? And I've been in organizations where someone thought we had to have 100% attach rate. And so the first article that was used all the time was, well, this is the article you attach when we don't have to attach an article, right? And we lose a lot of credibility with our teams when we do that, because then they think it's all about the numbers. And so what we're doing here, and again, you can see it's similar in the format, but we're saying, let's monitor the behavior. Like if they're attaching after close, which is this first category, that means that they didn't use it in the problem solving process. That means that they probably just attached it because their managers said their attach rates weren't high enough and they needed to just attach. That's not meaningful work. So you want to, be able to highlight, and once they knew that we had a dashboard that could keep track of this, they were less likely to do those kind of behaviors. We said, what's the percent that are attaching after solution proposed? So like I said, solution proposed is when we want to either attach or create our new content. How many times are we attaching after solution proposed, even though the case is still open? We have an incorrect attachment. So let's say the teams are attaching our landing pages, which doesn't help us because they have like 20 links on them or 50 links on them. We don't know which thing actually solved this issue. So attaching landing pages typically is, let me just pick my favorite, article and I'll just attach it to every case, right? We know that's gaming. And then this new KB delayed attachment, what we know is this is the percent that they're creating an article 10 days past the case closed. Now we know even if they create the article the second day after the case is closed, they forget all the important details. So that's the other reason why creating that article on demand in the moment of the problem solving process is anybody that's been in these high volume environments is you do not remember what you did yesterday because you're starting with today's business. And so for them to create an article for work they did 10 days ago, they're not going to do a very, good job with it. And so this is why we have this attached health scorecard. And then, we do just monthly health checks, so you can kind of see the way this is built is, it's by region. We can pull it down by article owner group, and then they can double click and they can see the individual unique users who are creating articles. So this is all they need at their fingertips. And this, it shows the attach rates, by the different teams. Again, data that's just right in their fingertips, and we flag it, or like I said, it's green or it's red, meaning that they're doing well or they slipped, right? And so a couple things that I wanted to just highlight is, I mentioned understanding the employee engagement. And the reason why that's important is we know in support, it's a hard job, right? Whether you're, solving employee issues internally with IT or HR, or you're solving customer issues, you want to make sure that your people who are taking care of your people are happy. And so, these are just some of the metrics that I would encourage you to establish in your own environment. Is we do an employee voice survey that we measure the employee engagement periodically. And we are surprised to tell that the engagement in our GTS environment is actually higher than our overall team within ServiceNow, which is, highly unusual, but we're doing a good job in making sure that our team's engaged. And then our attrition, again, in support, a lot of times people are moving into different teams. We're happy, that it's only 5.5%. That's not very much attrition given how challenging, the role is. So I put these in because not only do we want to measure the program, we also want to talk about the people and how satisfied are the people that are doing the work. So I also just, again, wanted you to think about, where you are, in your CSAT. Number one, do you have a way to assess your CSAT, both for internal users or external users? And then I highlighted the one at the bottom because this is another key metric that you want to consider is what is your cost per revenue, right? If you're in a support organization, is that going up or down? So industry benchmark, which is the TSIA that we use, and then we were at 4.0%, and we actually reduced, our cost per revenue, by an entire percentage point in 2020. So the key benefits, and then we'll take, just a quick break and answer some questions, then we'll go into the lesson learned. So just that, we talked about these elements, but faster case resolution. We want to decrease our low priority case volume that we're seeing, in support, let them help themselves. We want faster onboarding. That actually gives us more time to solve new issues if we've shifted that low priority work out to the self-serve. And then, like I mentioned, making sure that you are improving your product quality, whether it's the service that you're offering to your internal employees or whether it's a service that you're offering out to your customers. So in our world, we increased our attach rate, by 87%. And that just tells you that we weren't attaching. When I first started, it was like 5%. And right now we're, close to 60%. We talked about the fact that our faster, case resolution is huge when a knowledge article is involved. And then, this is surprising. And if you would have told me when I started this program here at ServiceNow, we literally are creating almost 1,000 new articles every month with our team, 10,000 in the last year. And again, I wouldn't have thought that was possible. And these are tech support engineers who don't want to create content. They never wanted to do this. They're not doc writers, but we've made the process so easy, that it's very, very efficient for them. So we're just going to move, take time for some questions, and then we'll talk through our lessons learned. Any questions, David?
Yeah,
Anybody that wants to jump in?
I think Mark had one that Murray had answered, but I'll just put it out there. What did you do to enable placing the knowledge content outside the authenticated firewall? And Murray shared an article, but any voiceovers or comments from your perspective, Lynda, on that?
Well, and that's it's an interesting question because and again, I remember, and this is back in the day, like, what are we confident that the public can know about our business, right? And so, and again, just speaking back from my, experience, 8 years ago at Salesforce, there was big drama about the known issues knowledge base, meaning it had to go all the way to Parker Harris. Because people are like, oh my gosh, the product manager, like, you can't share this information. All of our competitors, all of our customers. And what was so amazing, Parker said, our core value is we're a cloud company. We're running this business for our customers. They need to know these things. We have to be truthful. We have to be honest. And so what was huge about that is it set a standard for the fact that we, as a company at the time, were going to be very transparent. So as a company, you definitely need to think about, where you are on that. How transparent can you be? Are you in a regulated environment? And so there's a lot of business factors, but it is important knowing that everybody's going to Google first. They are. And if your content's not there, then you're already, have shut a very important door to shift work to people you don't pay, quite honestly. So unauthenticated content is super important. So obviously most vendors now, their documentation is all unauthenticated because there's no secret sauce. This is the way the product works and people aren't. So documentation is pretty much set the standard. But like I said, when Salesforce went out and said, no, our known issues portal is going to be completely unauthenticated. And the only time you need to authenticate is if you want to say, this affects me too, we require you to log in. so that we can now keep track of that. But what was so key with that is that it used to be they had to contact support to log a ticket to say, this impacts me too. And now they can just do it themselves on the portal. So we didn't have to have all those cases and all that noise, because support can't do anything about that anyway. It's a known issue and we're waiting for a product fix. And so it really changed the culture and allowed, people to feel like their voice was being heard. And then the product team actually took, which ones were flagged as this affects me too. And that's what drove the roadmap for when those issues were fixed. So that's just a short answer to the question. It's a complicated topic, but if you're not in Google results, like, you're not relevant these days in some way, right?
That's great. The one more question from Chantel at Legal Aid Ontario was around that change happens very fast in their organization, as she suspects with others as well.
Yeah.
However, when supervisors and users provide feedback or identified gaps, there's sometimes pushback from the KM team. And do you have any strategies in this regard?
Well, so and again, full transparency. So when I started at ServiceNow, my team was a publisher team. So I was that KM team that actually was pushing back on everything has to be reviewed. And so when I looked at our time to publish, I'm like, but wait a second. I mean, we can't keep up with the rate of change if we're going to be critical path in everything that we do. And so, I had to basically reskill my team, meaning that people that are doc writers that want to publish content and pretty it up and make it fancy, I was implementing a whole new methodology that said, I don't want it to be fancy. I don't want you to waste or invest that much time on articles that I don't even know are going to be used or not used very much. And so we had to really think about that. So I would, definitely, talk to them about the speed and getting something out there just in time at a just in time quality is more important than it not ever getting out, and therefore you're never getting benefit out of the investments in it. So time to publish was one of the metrics that really drove us, and I could show them on the fact that our time to publish most of our articles, it was taking from 14 to 30 days for us to get a new version of an article published. Well, nobody gets any value, internal or external, in that whole 30 days, right? So that's a challenge I totally experienced. And so, like, depending on your brand police, they also have a voice. And, a lot of times your info dev team is like, oh, you can't do that. Don't put that stuff out there. Like, you're impacting the credibility of our company. And it's like, no, technical people want the information easy to consume, easy to understand, and they want it quickly. They don't want us to spend time prettying it up. So there's a lot of research that's been done on this, as far as you often don't impact your brand experience based on, the fact that your content doesn't look 100% polished. Yeah, what else do you have, David?
So that was the. There's one more question. I also just do a quick time check. Maybe we go through the lessons learned quickly, because we've got about 5 to 8 minutes or 10 minutes left, sorry, in total. And so we need a few more minutes to wrap up at the end. So maybe about 5 more minutes to maybe get through lessons learned, if that works for you.
Yeah, and we've talked about all of these through the presentation. So this is more of a summary. So I'll kind of zip through these. So I've got 5 lessons on process and technology, and then 5 lessons on the people side. So, select a vendor, if you're going to do the KCS verified or KCS route, that the consortium has set up vendors that actually do these things well, and that they have a strong commitment to search, right? You just need to ask and make sure that, and if they don't, make sure that you have an enterprise strategy towards search. The second one is be careful what you measure. like I said, don't set goals on activities. Like everybody has to create 5 articles, because they will, and they'll garbage up your knowledge base faster, right? And then you have such a mess to clean up. I mentioned invest in data scientists. Again, that was huge for me. Number 4, again, we talked about this, use the data migration strategy as a training opportunity, like only migrate the most used content, and then that 80-20 rule. And then if they want to bring the content over that's their favorite articles, let them invest their time. Definitely, to the question that you just had, David, use an agile methodology to respond quickly to your changing requirements, right? Assume that it's not set in stone, that everything, is in play all the time. And so then we'll walk through, so that's the process in technology. The lessons learned on the people side, again, strong executive support. It's really difficult to move this, this big boulder if you don't have executive support. Establish a core team. So what we realized is if they're not involved in the design part, like they're not going to own it. They're going to resist the tool. They're going to just tell you didn't do the right fields, you didn't have the right close codes, you didn't have the right templates. They're going to have an opinion, a strong opinion, especially if it's a talented team. So get them in on the design of everything that you're doing, your content standard, your article template, your taxonomy, everything about your approval processes. The third one is line management. I find that they're actually the toughest sell, because they're like, but we have work to do, Lynda. Like we can't, and I hear this all the time on content evolution. They're like, yeah, like we don't have time. And I'm like, okay, you own that knowledge base. If you don't maintain it, I will retire it. And they're like, what? I'm like, no, I'm serious. If you don't retire, you don't own it, I'm not going to keep it in the system. And so they're the ones that kind of go, oh yeah, you're right, I do own it. Like, do you want me, what if I took that offline? Would you be sad? They're like, yeah, I'd be very sad. I said, okay, it's because it's a critical element to your business now. And then coaches, as I mentioned, are change agents. Again, this is a key element to be thinking about, how you do that. And you may not do it the way that KCS defines. And in fact, I've never gotten to do it as well as we did it here at ServiceNow, but the benefits have paid off, so much. And then this recognition program, again, it's not gift cards, because if they're doing it for ego, you need to think about what can you do to keep them doing, because you can't give them the gift cards every month, every quarter to do this. This has to be part of their day job. But you need to, what we call it, understand the ego food strategy, which means if you can show them that your article was viewed and reused by your internal team this many times, and it was actually viewed by your customer 1,000 times, they're like, really? That's cool. So those are the 10 lessons that I would share, just as summary.
Fantastic. Lynda, you just covered so much in 2 hours. I feel like we've been here all day, just the amount of stuff that we've gone through, which is incredible. And I think there's folks from all different ranges of organizations that have been involved today, and I think there's pockets that we're able to pull out from all different areas. The concept of that leadership buy-in, as you mentioned, and on this slide that speaks to it as well. Absolutely there. I think that the concept of those coaches and those peer groups from that perspective, and that really try to make sure that people are connected on the why, are all really great examples. And I think just from as we sort of start to conclude, we might have some questions at the end as we've got a few more minutes before with this group here. But I just wanted to say, on behalf of CSPN, thank you very much, and the group, for taking the time today to walk us through what such a great presentation. For those who are on and listening in remotely, CSPN is here to support with any questions, and we'll put some follow-up notes in the PowerPoint into our email that we'll send out, as well as ServiceNow. If there's questions that come up afterwards, or interested in jumping on a call to talk through your current challenges or perspectives, and want a second opinion on the direction you're going, or trying to figure out where do we start or where do we keep going, feel free to reach out. Our contact will be in the note as well. Find Lynda on LinkedIn as well. And feel free to reach out. But with that, I just wanted to say thank you very much. I think there's a clarification question from Chantel, but what we'll do is use this as a sort of the official thank you and the wrap up of the session. And we might ask a question or two here, and then we'll wrap up just before the hour. So feel free to log any questions in the chat as we wrap up. But Lynda, just as we finish up, there was that one clarification question from Chantel was around that last question we asked around how change happens. And really the question was about creating new articles with gaps identified that were about already existing articles. So it's about how do we that sort of push back and forth with the line managers about getting their buy-in as sort of things are always changing and we're busy and that thing. So I think you kind of tackled it in that last question, but I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add in.
Yeah, so I would just say that it is going to always be messy, but in my case, what's shifted, as our program has matured is it used to be me and my team were always bringing data and situations, to the line managers. And when the line managers, when you meet with them and then they're saying, hey, Lynda, our attach rate is this, our create rate's this, we're having trouble with this. Like, that you've made a huge shift in the fact that they are now owning the business and they are now looking at you as a trusted advisor of how can my team help support the work that you're doing, right? And so it's just really important that if it's always the knowledge team is push, and the other teams are pushing back, right? That's not, you need to get it shifted. And I always use the teeter-totter is the fact, and someone shared this, when I have old kids now, but they said, okay, Lynda, think of the teeter-totter. And if you always hold the responsible position, holding it down, and your, 10-year-old is always up in the air, they have to hold the not responsible position. It's gravity, it's a law. So you need to start, inching that up to where you're not holding the full responsible position. You're letting that go, and they have to pick up the responsibility if you're letting it go. If they believe it's an asset that they own, then, and now I feel that in my environment that it's actually shifted where my line managers are now holding the full responsible position. And now me and my team are actually kind of up in the air, which again, that is goodness. I just have to say,
when people are asking questions, it's a good thing, and people are engaged. I think that's great. And so we've had lots of questions throughout today, and I think people have said, "Wow, this has been a great session." And so why don't we call it there, everyone? We wish you all the best. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay home in this crazy world that we live in these days. And from the CSPN team, and thank you very much, Lynda, and thank you to our sponsor ServiceNow for organizing this. Really appreciate it.
Great.
Thanks, everyone. Have
David.
a great day.
I've had a blast.
Thank you.